Drew.
Hey.
So you've mentioned that you don't think AI is going to outsmart humans, but you think it's going to unlock unprecedented productivity. I'm just curious if you can elaborate more on that. And also, I live in San Francisco, and all we seem to do is talk about when AGI is coming.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you think that means that you don't think AGI is a real thing.
Okay, we'll tackle each of those. And hey, everyone, it's great to be here. So on productivity and AI outsmarting humans, I think there's some nuance. Like, AI is already smarter than most people at a lot of things. But I think we should see this as something that's complementary rather than threatening. And also just a continuation of a story that's been going for a long time. And if you think about, like, the story of human progress is we basically invent machines. We find ways to, like, offload our busy work to those machines. And then we free up our time and build better machines. And then that is, like, the virtuous cycle. And that tracks from, like, the Industrial Revolution and our, like, literal physical heavy lifting, and then now it's a lot more of our cognitive heavy lifting. But even there, we've had this, like, silicon brain that's a complement to our human brains for a while. Because even before AI, when you think about using a computer or doing a Google search, these are like an extension of your brain. You don't need to remember stuff the same way. It's like this augmentation. And so I think on the productivity front, what's really exciting is there's a lot of busy work and white-collar work that can be automated or assisted in new ways. And I think we're still early in the learning curve, and maybe not even using what we already have to its fullest potential. But in a world where before Gen AI just felt like we were just getting more and more busy work and more communication, more and more overloaded, Gen AI is like the force that can help offset that. And then secondly, with AGI, I think the definition of AGI that makes the most sense to me is just sort of like where the goalpost is. It's like whatever AI can't do, like, right this second. And then as soon as AI can beat people in chess or do something creative or this or that, like, that's not AGI anymore. AGI is like the next thing. Right. So I think a good analogy there is, or I don't think AGI is going to be really an event any more than, like, making a supercomputer versus a computer was an event. I think it's going to be a more continuous spectrum than you think. Because I think even 5 years ago, if we were sitting here and we're like, hey, guess what? There's going to be this thing that not only can it read, but it can write, it can talk to you, it can write poems, it can draw pictures, it can write JavaScript code and then write a sonnet about the JavaScript code. We'd be like, oh my God, like, we're done, it's over. And yet we have that. And life is sort of more like yesterday than it is tomorrow. So I think we have to put this in a bit of perspective, that these things take a little bit longer to evolve than you think.
Okay. Yeah, speaking of tomorrow, I'm super curious about how you think AI is going to affect the economy, particularly in the near terms, like the next couple of years. How are jobs going to change? How will the economy be affected?
Yeah. So I think probably less than people think, but a lot of good stuff is going to happen as we move up the learning curve. So AI automates tasks more than jobs. And then your job is like a bundle of lots of different kinds of tasks. So to the extent, now, if you have a job that consists of doing, like, repetitive tasks or the same thing over and over again, those things are the biggest targets for AI, where you really will see automation start to make a dent. And so workflows around customer support, and to some extent workflows around engineering, but kind of at a low level of the stack in engineering, like, those things will be automated more. And so I think the parts of the economy where it's like easy to do things like outsourcing or offshoring, I think those things are much more kind of in the crosshairs in the near term. But I also think, again, the time constants on this are longer than people expect. I mean, just look at self-driving cars. I remember being in rooms like this 15 years ago when Uber was talking about this first vision of, like, having a self-driving car, and and people connected the dots pretty quickly. They're like, oh my God, yeah, we're gonna have a world, we're on the highways, there's not gonna be any humans driving the cars, and there's millions of people that are gonna be out of work. And everybody was like gripped by this and like totally captured our imagination. But fast forward 15 years, and probably no one here arrived in a self-driving car at the conference, right? There's maybe a few hundred people who are in a Waymo or self-driving, like fully autonomous vehicle right now, but a few billion people who use Google Maps. And so I think the way that I think about it is that automation is kind of this ladder where you can't really skip too many rungs of the ladder. You have to start at the bottom, and you dream of the top rung of like full autonomy, human out of the loop, but really most of the economic value comes at these lower levels, like automating little subtasks. Like we didn't automate full driving in all conditions. We automated like navigation. We automated like lane assist, and then it moved up. It's like, well, maybe it will like park my car for me, or drive on the highway, but only in a very like confined sense. And so I think, as far as the economy, there's going to be, it'll be more. I think the more repetitive the task, the more I think that is in the crosshairs in the near term. But I think the bigger picture of like, oh, we'll have no, and and we won't need to learn computer science or engineering anymore. I think that's pretty overblown.
Yeah, anecdotally, I'm hearing that it's a lot harder to find a software engineering job than it was maybe like 5 or 10 years ago. Do you think that's a direct result of AI right now, or just something else in the economy, like companies trying to squeeze productivity?
I mean, I think it's a little of both.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think there's sort of still a hangover from the sort of boom times in SaaS and in tech. And so you went from pretty much every company hiring as many people as they can to like a lot of companies throwing it in reverse, which is a huge dislocation. And then, I think, I don't think we'll be automating the job of software engineering anytime soon, but even those low, level one type, or those like that first running of the ladder, things like GitHub Copilot, just these autocomplete does increase your productivity to some extent. And then we're moving up the stack from like writing a little, line of code to, there's been this progression from like a line of code to a function to now writing a full pull request. And so that does get you leverage. I mean, maybe it's not like a 5x, 10x kind of improvement. But companies, you're going to see this in every discipline. Like as you deploy these AI tools, every company's going to have a choice. Either we can get like 20 engineers worth of output out of the same 10 people, and some companies will choose like, hey, we're just going to have 5 engineers instead of 10.
Yeah. So a lot of people are talking about AI agents this year. Curious if you are also on board with AI agents and really excited about them and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting because it is a step, like it is, we're moving up a rung of the ladder, right? It's from where we started, it's a very kind of reactive and transactional experience. Like I ask a question, ChatGPT gives me an answer. But now the prospect of AI being able to use tools, and like search the web for you, or be able to like see and hear and deal with things other than text. The ability for agents to run in the background, so that, and the ability for natural language to factor in this automation without code. We're pretty quickly reaching a future where you can be like, hey, Slack me every morning with the emails I need to look at. And then the system and the AI will figure out, okay, to do that, I need to take the following 15 steps. And if I get stuck, I can kind of adapt and work around like a human would. And you see things like deep research from OpenAI as a good example of like, this is a multi-step workflow where, it's very tuned and you get a result that's like probably as good as like a, reasonable to expert level human.
Yeah. So you've been CEO of Dropbox, I think, for almost 20 years now. So you've got a ton of experience managing people and working with people. And I'm just kind of curious, just in the context of AI, how have your views on like kind of technology and human intelligence evolved? And are there things that are just really uniquely human that we won't be able to replicate with AI?
Yeah. So I think a lot has stayed constant. So I mean, I gave a talk like 5 years ago about this like human-machine partnership and this idea of like, we're going to have the silicon brain that can do a lot of the heavy lifting for us, and we'll finally be able to like cut down on a lot of the busy work at work. And so I think what's surprising is that's happened a lot faster and sort of more broadly than I expected. But I think you're going to see that there's kind of this very zero-sum discussion of like, all right, when's AI going to know this so that it can replace this human? I think that's pretty misguided, at least for the foreseeable future. I think it's an augmentation story, and there's usually like a panic that accompanies every new technology. Um, but what ends up happening is a little bit different. So when Excel did not end accounting or financial analysis, it made it much less about like repetitive rote calculations and much more about the business, or the modeling a business and the conceptual understanding of a business and mapping that. That became a lot more valuable. When digital photography came along, people were like, "Oh my God, the industry of photography is dead." When electronic music came along, people were like, "There's no that this is like going to destroy music," and in none of these cases did it actually destroy the profession, but it did change it, and in both like it did democratize each of these disciplines, right? So suddenly a lot more people had access to being like an okay photographer, or to do some basic financial modeling. But the valuable part and what the humans did kind of up-leveled to a more kind of strategic place. And so I think that is like the happy version of the story. Is like, well, these are really, the AI is going to work for us. We got to steer it. The robots are not going to take our jobs. It's the person who knows how to use the robot who's going to take your job. And I think it's a more bleak story if you like can't or won't move up the learning curve, or like imagine being like an analyst or an accountant who like refused to learn Excel. Like that's a tough setup. But I think the uniquely human things like humans still want to work with other humans, and AI can't really do that the same way. And as much as there's amazing things that a lot of tasks we've been able to automate, like AI doesn't really learn from its experiences or remember things like quite the same way a person does. You can't really like sign up an AI as a new employee and have it figure out what to do. And I think there's going to be a lot of new breakthroughs on the research frontier that we have no line of sight to today before you see that.
Will you force employees at Dropbox to use AI or learn how to use AI?
Yeah, for sure. Fortunately, I don't think we need to force them that much, but it is like learning a new instrument, and it's uncomfortable. And like coding tools, for example, I was surprised, like with other CEOs I talked to, just like organic adoption is lower than you think. And I think a couple reasons. One is if you tried these tools a couple of years ago, they were pretty like unreliable. They've gotten a lot better, but you trade one problem for another. You're like, okay, maybe I'm not typing as much anymore, but now I have a new problem. I'm like a code reviewer, and my new game is like find the bug in the thing that in what this AI wrote. And so on net, it's not as much of a productivity gain as you think, and it takes a while to kind of learn that new instrument. But I think that we certainly want to be early adopters and up the learning curve on this as quickly as possible.
All right, final question. It's about remote work. So I know that Dropbox transitioned to a remote workforce during COVID.
Yeah.
And I think with AI now, a lot of the AI companies are crowing that they're super in person. They're at least 3 days. A lot of them are 5 days mandated in office. So I'm just wondering if you're rethinking the decision to have a remote workforce at Dropbox.
No. So we went like 90% remote during COVID. And the basic question we had back then was like, do we hit the rewind button? Which is basically like, do we try to go back to 2019? But then there's also like a fast forward button, and recognizing there's a lot of good things that we all experience from even in lockdown. Like, oh wow, we could be like productive. We have this flexibility. We knew that people weren't going to give that back, and so instead we thought like, all right, well, there are productivity problems. There is this learning curve, but like instead of just complaining about how bad version 0.5 of this that we were all forced into during lockdown. Like let's be the company that designs version 2 of this and version 3 of this. And so we turned Dropbox like quite literally into like this lab for distributed work. We studied all the other remote first companies. We synthesized like our own playbook, which we open sourced based on our research. We went 90% remote after being 100% in person. Look, I think if you can fit everybody in a room physically, you should do that. If I were to start over today, I'd be 5 days a week in person the way we were in the beginning. But once you scale, you have to confront this head on. And I think mostly people are talking past each other in this debate. I mean, one is like this virtual first working model has worked super well for us. Our recruiting success, our engagement, employee engagement, retention, all these things are way higher today than they were before the pandemic. People cite our working model as like a primary reason they join Dropbox and stay there. We're able to sort of punch above our weight class in terms of getting good people, especially because of all these RTO mandates.
Yeah.
And the companies that are forcing people back to work, they're not stupid. Like, there are these issues of remote work. Like, you lose human connection, you lose context. There is a productivity hit. But forcing people back to the office is like forcing people back into movie theaters. Like, it's not that movie theaters are like bad. It's like they just are sort of tuned for a world that no longer exists. And sure, there's maybe a productivity tax from, not knowing who's doing what and a bunch of things with the digital environment, but those are fixable. And then, by the way, sitting people back in their cars to be commuting for a few hours a day is like not productive either. And so I think you're going to see this backlash of people being like, hey, like, why are you, like, I get it, okay, I'm at gunpoint, you're forcing me back to, I'm commuting to the office again, sitting in a car for, a few hours a day now, whereas that might have been an hour before COVID, and I'm like literally sitting on the same Zoom meeting that I would have been sitting on at home. Like, what is the point? So I think there's more to it than that. And then our view is like, we shifted Dropbox's mission basically from syncing your files to basically making a better digital environment and organizing your working life. And this creates a huge opportunity because like every company is confronting these same questions. And our answer is like, all right, let's build, let's shift the value we provide from storage to being this like organization and intelligence layer on everything. And like, one of the first things you lose is context and understanding like how do I get the basic information I need to do my job. And so what we did is we built a product called Dropbox Dash, which we just launched a few months ago, that basically helps you find that thing, right? How many times a day are you like, all right, which in my 100 browser tabs or which 10 search boxes do I use to find this thing? I try a few and then I Slack someone and try to get someone else to find it for me. I mean, like, that's not a good solution. And so Dash gives you that one search box that searches everything. And then also, so it searches your Google Docs, your email, your Salesforce, your Airtable, everything from one place. You actually don't even need files on Dropbox. And then it works in natural language. So it can answer a lot of the questions that ChatGPT can't because it's not connected to your stuff. But I can ask Dash, like, oh yeah, what time do I go on in HumanX? What am I talking about? Yep. And I think this is going to be something that basically almost 0 people are using today to like 1 billion people are using pretty soon. So I think with all these things, all these dislocations, you have to think about like the change presents problems, but it also presents opportunities, and that's what we think about.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having this talk with me today.
Awesome. Thanks, Hannah.
Cool. Thanks. Bye.
All right.